crack the myth, crack the mystique, and write about one of the most consequential investors of the last 40 years. He calls himself the world's craziest investor.
Lionel Barber is former editor of the Financial Times. His latest book is Gambling Man, a biography of Masayoshi Son, known as Masa, a venture capitalist who has made and lost hundreds of billions with his bets on technology.
The very nature of entrepreneurialism is risk-taking.
He's lost enough money to put him in the top 5 on the rich list, you know?
He was seeing people for, 15, 20 minutes and signing $500 million checks. I mean, this is Nutsville, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Your list of previous interviews is like a who's who of everyone of the last few decades. Jeff Bezos, Obama, you mentioned. Why Masa?
Money. He's the money man. He's made several multi-billion fortunes and lost them in the space of career going, I think, 4 decades. And so I've always had a maxim that follow the money if you want a good story. And I figured that this was a man who really knew all about the risk business. I could learn a lot about that. And then Japan intrigued me too. So put all those things together and I thought it would make a great biography.
So could you explain to someone who has never heard of this man who he is and why he's got all this money?
Okay, think fairly short individual who comes from Japan but is not Japanese. He's actually comes from Korea, or his parents and grandparents are Korean-based. So he's different. He's an outsider. Second, he's somebody who's ridden the technological wave of the last 40 years, from the microchip to internet to mobile to AI. I mean, that's what he's done, and he's made a lot of money as a result. And he's been a global investor. So he's not just made in Japan. He's bought a lot of famous companies. He bought Arm, which was Britain's best technology company, or one of the top ones, the advanced semiconductor designer. He's bought into Yahoo, the search engine in America. Alibaba, worth at one point more than 200 billion. He had a stake in that, made huge amounts of money. And then, mobile phone companies like Sprint in America. He's a global investor. So think short, but very rich.
Okay.
And describes himself as Yoda, by the way, from Star Wars.
That is a powerful name. Why is he not a household name? Why do you think?
Well, he is in Japan because he's one of the 3 Japanese businessmen, one of the 3 big mouths, because he does tend to boast quite a bit, or at least talk about him being able to see into the future. But to answer your question, I think we tend to sort of know American business people like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, Elon Musk. They're household names. But the Japanese, they're all a bit mysterious, a long way away. They're not really big here. I mean, the Arm Holdings acquisition in 2016 is the exception. So I think that's really the reason. And by the way, that's the attraction for writing a biography is, listen, crack the myth, crack the mystique, and write about one of the most consequential investors of the last 40 years.
Could I tell you a story about how I heard of Masa? And I think it will lean into what you're saying. So it was around 2018-19, and I lived in Manchester, and this new shared office space called WeWork had just been introduced, and it was legendary because they had free beer on tap. So if you could get into this place, you could drink for free. So this was the place that everyone tried to get into. My friend had a seat there, basically just so that he could drink free beer. It was like a few £100 a month for like a hot desk. One random Thursday, I went into this place and we were having the beers and they had free food everywhere. And there was about 50 people in there and they had DJ Luck and MC Neat, which to my generation, with a little bit of luck,
make it through the night.
Very big. And they were just in there and I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why are there's 40 people in the room. So I went out and it led me down this rabbit hole of WeWork and Adam, and then to Masa and SoftBank and the investment. And I just thought, these guys are mental. They're clearly burning cash. And amongst me and my friends, Masa became a meme of, the Wall Street bets kind of degenerate community. He was like the ultimate guy. And anytime we were going to do something degenerate, we would send images of Masa into our WhatsApp group of like,
I'm sure he loved that.
Yeah. Good. Well, we're going to go mental tonight. And that was my view of him, and probably until I read your book, in terms of, I knew that he'd made money in the past, but I always thought that he was like on the bleeding edge of risk and, gambling, and was probably a bit loose with his money. And maybe because of language barrier as well, that didn't help whenever I saw him. He was like pidgin English and Yoda and all this stuff. What was your view of him going into writing the book, and did he change your opinion of him?
It certainly changed my view, spending more time with him, and above all, going into Japan. I did 6 trips in 14 months. Didn't do wonders for the bags under the eyes, by the way. But obviously, when you dig into the subject, you begin to see a bit more nuance beyond what you rightly described. And by the way, he calls himself the world's craziest investor. It's half joke, half serious, because he does have this bottomless appetite for risk, for betting the company. And quick segue into his love affair with Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork, this office leasing space company, this Jesus lookalike figure. He's about 6'6". By the way, I spent at Financial Times, when I was editor, awards dinner. We called him the boldest businessman in the year. And I sat next to him at dinner and I thought, this guy really is crazy. I mean, the way he talks about world domination, becoming super billionaire. And Masa, of course, loves this because he's made lots and lots of money and then lost it. And he fell in love. He had sort of founder's love affair with Adam Newman. And of course, it did turn into a disaster. We lost probably $14 billion.
Casual.
Yeah, casual.
Light work.
So I wasn't there in Manchester, but I was there in London in 2016.
And you were rinsing that free bar too.
Yeah.
The red on tap, the red beer. That was
Mine's
great.
a vodka vodka.
Okay.
None of this beer stuff. Anyway.
Why do you think then our audience should care about this man?
Oh, I think you can learn a huge amount about investment and risk taking. So let me unpack that. The first is, Masa is not a short-term in and out guy when it comes to investing in companies. He will put his money on the table and he will stick with it through thick and thin. He stayed with Alibaba for 15 years, really, before he was selling down the state, when he got into a bit of financial difficulty later. But he thinks he sees the way technology is going and is therefore prepared to put his money where his big mouth is. That's the first. I think the other is he really does understand. He has a very good understanding of the application of technology. So he's a great operator of businesses when he's focused, because he does tend to have a sort of attention span of, rather short attention span. I mean, he has 15 minutes where he signs billion-dollar checks. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that to everybody because he goes on the gut. But on the other hand, when he's actually running a business, like he was trying to run the mobile phone business from scratch in Japan, he did it very well. He's really on top of the technology.
Can I just go into that turmoil a bit more then? Because it sounds almost counterintuitive that you've got this man who is a great business operator. So he's built businesses that were successful. But then you describe him as an addict and a gambler. He says he's not a gambler, but everyone around him says this guy's a loose cannon.
Or addicted.
Yeah,
to gambling.
addicted.
Yeah.
He's in businesses for the long haul, but will make a decision on the fly. These traits don't seem to kind of, they all seem at odds. What do you think is like the dominant personality trait within this man that makes him a success?
Well, it almost sounded like Sigmund Freud and the ego and the id, but that's about as far as my knowledge goes. But there are two sides of the brain, and Masa has definitely got, I think it's more than 50% actually, and seriously, somebody, I better not name them, a billionaire, multi-billionaire on Wall Street, when I asked him about him, he said he's a genius, he sees in the future, but he's addicted. He's addicted to taking risk and spending, vast sums. And I just think that's the fascinating contradiction or tension in his character. How do you explain it? I think you explain it by going back to his roots and seeing him as an outsider, somebody whose family and himself has suffered intense prejudice in Japan because he's Korean Japanese. He had to live as a child under an alias because all the Koreans do. They have Japanese names as well as their Korean names.
As well.
There were squatters after the war, yes. And so if you come from nothing, I guess if you then stake everything, all you do is go back to nothing. So, you're kind of all square.
Do you think that this is all like part of his drive and his, like, obviously because he was an outsider and he was like an immigrant, would you say?
Well, he's
minority.
He's an ethnic minority.
Best ethnic minority in
his
the world.
His grandparents were
Was he
immigrants.
more an asylum seeker? Or?
No, because his grandfather came from Korea, from the mainland, followed later by his grandmother as economic migrants. Remember, Korea at that time, very briefly, at the turn of the 20th century, was a Japanese colony. It was part of the Japanese empire, Imperial Japan. And the family land was taken over by the Japanese army. So they came to Japan in 1917 and then 1927, basically for economic opportunity. And his grandfather's first job was in a colliery, in a coal mine.
Did you say that they weren't allowed to apply for jobs, that they couldn't be doctors and things? So a lot of the Koreans went into gambling.
That's exactly right.
If that hadn't happened, do you think he still would be the man he was today? Like, do you think that's where he got his gambling, like the taste of gambling from? Or do you think he always would have been
his
like that?
His dad was pretty degenerate.
I met his dad and we'll come to that. But I think, look, you've got to think, Masa is born, Masayoshi Son, he's born in 1957. His grandparents came at the turn of the century. Things are going okay. Then the Second World War happens. And as you know, Japan was annihilated. I mean, you had the atomic bomb. I mean, it was just absolute devastation. And the economy took, a number of years to recover. The Son family actually went back to Korea after 1945 at the end of the war. And they were rejected by their Korean relatives, just seen as, you're Japanese, what are you doing? You're hawking goods, you're better than that. We don't want you around here anyway. So they had to go back to Japan. And that's why they went into the slum, into the shanty town. And that's where they lived and where Masa's first years were, in that shanty town. Now, by 1957, things are getting a bit better in Japan. The economy, his father, who's initially a bootlegger, he's selling moonshine. He then goes into pig breeding, which, by the way, you both know this, quite successful. You make money out of that.
You told us because they reproduce quicker.
They do.
That's how you make the money.
You've read this book very closely. Congratulations. But then he goes into loan sharking. All this is the undercover economy.
Yeah.
And then they go into this thing called pachinko, the gambling parlors, these slot machines. And I have to say, there is a Netflix series on it. There's a great book, which I'd recommend to all listeners, called Pachinko, which describes what the Korean Japanese experience. And as you rightly said, you can't get a job as a teacher if you're Korean Japanese at that time in Japan. So what do? You go into the sort of underworld economy of slot machine gambling. And Masa, I think he learnt the hustle from watching his father in that business. But he wanted to do better than that. Yeah. And that's why he went, crucially, and it's very important, that he went to America as a high school student where he learnt English, and that's what made him differentiated.
So pachinko's onomatopoeia for the machine noises they make. They're like slot machine-y kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And just to set the tone, when you say like grade, there was the Yakuza were involved in this. It was a dangerous industry, right? And his dad
Yakuza being Japanese organized crime, missing finger syndrome.
They were like
missing tip of the finger,
tattoos,
lots of tattoos.
So he was dealing with like dangerous people, and his dad took on loads of debt and made really risky decisions around his business. You tell this beautiful story about how he messed with the machines so that they just paid out to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I sat with his father, who, by the way, then was 87. He's now sadly passed away. I mean, I sat down to interview him in the family home months before he died of cancer. And he described to me, exactly as you were saying, that how he bought a large amount of land with a pachinko gambling parlor space, and he fixed the pins so everybody would think that this was the place to go if you wanted to win money. So it was a sort of lost leading exercise. You lost money, and then he fixed them back in order to regain, just make the profit. But initially, everybody went around saying you can't lose if you play at the golden line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was month by month he would switch.
Exactly. Yeah.
But his goal was to have 5 times the amount of people in his casino. And you point out in the book that was more people than in the whole area. So he had this ridiculous goal, backed it with debt, and then poured money into losing in gambling.
Yeah, and what makes this so interesting is that if you think today, and probably over the last 15 years, this idea of sort of go for total market access, total market share, maximize that, and you don't need to make money, but you will make money later. I mean, that's the kind of thing that Amazon
very tech foundry.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Masa has done that, big time with his businesses. So I think there's a bit of gambling DNA at work.
But to be able to back your picks, which you base with your gut and not flip-flop, is the hardest part. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm gonna buy Bitcoin. Then it goes down to like, oh, I'm gonna sell Bitcoin. They
quick decision, quick
decision. Yeah, if you have an impulsive decision, you might have an impulsive decision the other way. But to have an impulsive decision and then to stick with a company for 15 years is quite rare, I think.
It is. I mean, I don't know how, tough your tummy is, but,
Not that tough. It's pretty tough, but not that tough.
Yeah, I mean, to go with those wild swings. I mean, if you think about Masa's career, it's a little like watching a Swiss mountain range.
Yeah.
Up and down.
We're going to go on to his risk-taking behavior, but I just want to talk about, because, when we look at these people, we often ask, are they born or made? This kind of nature-nurture. Mm-hmm. I was reading the book and the introduction and the discussion. I was like, oh, he's clearly his father's son, risk-taking, this kind of pachinko thing. But then his dad said to him, you shouldn't care about money. And he was like, no, you're kind of wrong. And then went off and did his career. And he was clearly very individual and headstrong. His dad even said that, I knew that he was special. He was very different to my other kids and stuff.
Well, he was the second son. So in the family, 3 other brothers. And, he was treated like a princeling. I mean, he really was spoiled. And his father was telling him he was a genius when he was 5 or 6 years old. And I don't know about you two, but if you've been called a genius by your dad, I mean, that would encourage certain strange behavior, probably. I mean, it was endless, and he got really pampered. But he said, I want to be different. I don't want to go down the gambling route. I want to pick an area which is mine, and then I can get to be number one in that subject. And he was very focused about that. Now, crucially, he did have English, so that positioned him very well, as Japan was doing very well in the 1980s, to be a sort of gateway for American figures. But he also decided, I'm going to do something different, not gambling, software distribution. And his timing was very good, 1981.
Yeah. There's a problem that a lot of business owners face. I was one of them until recently. What do you do with the money that's sitting in your company? That excess money that you don't need to use to operate, but you don't want to rip it all out and just get taxed into oblivion. If it just sits there, inflation destroys the real value of it. But a lot of small companies, including sole traders, don't do anything with the cash in their business accounts. This is why I'm happy that we're partnering with Tide.
They offer an instant access saver account where new customers can get 4.07% AER variable on unlimited deposits until at least the 31st of March 2025. I use a Tide account, and I even store the money that I need for my VAT in there just to generate a bit of interest while I'm waiting to pay the bill. If you're interested in putting your money in the business to work, head to tide.co/savings. There's a link in the description for you. For full offer T's and C's and Tide's terms, visit tide.co/terms. Variable rates are correct as of the 7th of November 2024.
He has this, that he's bought into this I'm a genius, I can kind of see the future. You know, when he was raising money for his vision fund, which was his big like pot of money that he was going.
I'd say it's fairly big. Yeah. $98.6 billion.
Yeah, pretty big.
Not bad.
He was going around the world tapping up Western investors and Western magnates, people we would know like Warren Buffett, and they said no to him. Did you get a sense of him, of how he felt about being said, like, these people saying no to him?
I'm sure he would say to himself, "Why?" He'd say, "Why? Why? I mean,
are they crazy?
Why are they crazy? I mean, I'm going to win. I mean, I don't think he's somebody who dwells on this. He's already on to the next thing. I mean, he was curiously in the meeting with Warren Buffett, and I did interview Warren Buffett, not for a long interview, but still an interview.
It's a big name to drop on the floor. Don't worry about it. If I spoke to him for 10 seconds, I'd say I'd interviewed him.
I saw him in Sun Valley at the Allen and Company media conference that I do attend, and I talked to him a bit, and then he said, just get in touch and I'll talk to you about it. You know, so I did, and Warren Buffett is worth 100 billion. I mean, just 100 billion plus. I mean, he's massively successful.
He's given loads away as well.
And he has, He's pledged to give more than 90% of his wealth away, based in Nebraska in the middle heart of America. I mean, he's the absolute opposite of Masayoshi Son. He is not a kind of go-with-the-gut gambler. But Masa seriously thought he could persuade Warren Buffett to give him money. But Buffett rebuffed him after, little more than 25 minutes.
Long flight
Long flight around the world for just that. And Buffett being very modest, I'm just trying to earn a few pennies. And Masa just didn't get it. But somebody else I talked to, who was present in the meeting, said it was absolutely obvious that Buffett had no interest whatsoever. But I think Masa just then would go off to the next person. And remember that in 2017-18, every person in the world, and I should emphasize this, every person who had money or wanted money wanted to talk to Masa.
Because he had the biggest pile of cash.
He had the biggest pile of cash, exactly.
He was the richest man in the world for
3 days.
This was in the 90s.
That's 3 days more than me. So, I'd take it for 10 minutes.
But this speaks to what you're saying about like resilience and just moving on. You said you heard about him in the 90s, didn't you, because of Yahoo? He then became the richest man for 3 days, and then he lost 90% of his wealth.
98.
On the fourth or fifth day or whatever, because of the dot-com bubble.
Yes. I mean, he'd made a lot of money on paper through his investment in Yahoo. He did that in 1995, 96. So that was worth several billion by then. And then he just sprayed the money around on all sorts of .com, including, by the way, the dog walking app. You knew that. Should have written a bit more of that, probably. And some crazy loss makers, Webvan. These would be familiar to anybody who remembers the dot-com bubble. But when it finally burst, April 2000, February 15th, he was the richest man in the world. Within 6 weeks, it was already going down. And it wasn't a sort of overnight crash. It was it was like the bubble slowly deflating. But amazingly, I mean, this is incredible. Within months, he's saying, well, now's a good time to invest because markets have gone down so far. And second, you clear up the mess and I'm going to invest in broadband. And that's what he did. I mean, and he was losing $1 billion a year on broadband, but he was convinced that's the future. I'm going to do that. So I think for readers and listeners, I mean, this is all about, reinvention if you're a capitalist. you're an entrepreneur. You have to be constantly thinking about reinvention.
The biggest lesson I've taken from it is just take risks. Because if this man can put everything on the line over and over again and always come back, and you're talking hundreds of billions, like you can carve out 10 grand or 5 grand or a grand or just a bit of your time and just try something. Because I think most people are just so scared to take any risk.
I think that's absolutely right, by the way. I mean, some of it is not necessarily rational, but you need to sort of get over that. If you're being incredibly rational, incredibly careful, then you're not probably going to make any money.
Yeah, you shouldn't really invest in anything if you're being super rational. You're like, oh, it's safe if I just keep it safe rather than taking the risk. But when Damien was saying about when he met Warren Buffett and he didn't get his investment, have you, in your experience, seen any time when he's like lost self-belief, or is he always just like fully entrenched in his ideas, and no matter what happens, he's unwavering? Or has he shown any faltering at any time? Like maybe that wasn't the best.
Is he human?
Is he human, or is he just a legendary like gambler who just never second guesses himself?
Yeah, I think he does go through these acts of penance, where he sort of says he's sorry, and he may have overreached a bit, but I'm not convinced that he really believes this.
Just lip service.
I think he thinks basically, I am right. I just got the timing wrong. I was ahead of my time, and so it was just a question of timing. I think the only time he really there's a little bit of the self-belief begins to ebb a bit. You can tell when he frowns. So in the book, I spend a lot of time going through various photographs and thinking, what are the photographs that are really telling? Now, I would say that there's at least a couple in this book that I really like. One of them is a self-portrait. And by the way, we were talking about the dual personality. Masa is actually a rather good artist. He paints. He paints in the late 19th century Impressionist style, but he also did this self-portrait of when he was 16 years old. And it's a really dark portrait. And when I asked him about it, he said he felt suicidal when he was 16 because he was so rejected, discriminated against, and that was why he went to America. I think the other moment, the other picture I like is the frown, the Masa frown. When he's frowning, that's when you know he's really teed off. He's really got some, what on earth has gone wrong here? And there's a bit of self-doubt.
So the audience can kind of wrap their head around this, because we throw around some big numbers, but how much money do you think he's lost over his investing career?
Cumulatively, if you're talking about paper losses included, I would say over $250 billion.
This guy. And today he's worth about 35, 40. Is that right?
I think he's about 35 gross, because he's obviously got borrowings. Now, those are very hard to figure out. What does he owe the banks? Has he, those loans are against SoftBank stock, which, by the way, now has picked up again. And that's gone through peaks and troughs. Overall, if you'd invested in SoftBank in the last 10 plus years, you would have done slightly better than the S&P. Not much better, which isn't that good. On the other hand, if you traded in and out at the right times, you would have done really quite well. But you need still good stomach.
Better than the S&P is pretty good. Most people don't, over 10 years, especially the last 10 years, it's been pretty good.
I mean, that company that we just mentioned, ARM, the semiconductor designer company based in Cambridge, that he bought at 32 billion in 2016, literally in the middle, just after Brexit. So we had no government. I'm amazed that I've done a whole chapter on that. I'm amazed that there's not been a little bit more comment, because we were the naked emperor in the room, and he just came in and, took the company. It's now worth about $140 billion. Think about that, because of the, we'll probably talk about this, the AI boom.
But on a recent interview, you said the advice you would give him is to focus more on his share price, because his book value, the total of his assets is worth more than the company. And it's strange because...
Drives him crazy.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised he's not a little bit more crazy about it, because you basically... Is it because it's trading off him, his name, and his reputation? Is it like a cult of personality gone wrong in a sense?
Well, it can go right as well if you think about it, because without Masa, what would SoftBank be? Well, it would be a mobile telephone company business. It would have Arm, but what's called, technical term here, you almost pressed the button, didn't you? See that?
Too excited.
It's called the conglomerate discount, and what that means essentially is what you were saying, that if the sum of all the parts exceed by a long way the share price of the overall group, then something's wrong.
Yeah.
Now, I think that is a reflection of his, what is he going to do next kind of thing, and how does it hang together, and also some questions about the debt. I mean, SoftBank has over the years been one of the most indebted companies in the world. I mean, we had a bit of a back and forth, I can say this on this show, me and the company, because they say, you have to take into account this and that, and it's not that the number isn't as big as it seems, blah, blah. And they have been good on redeeming their bonds, often ahead of schedule and stuff. But there's no question that investors have become a bit nervous about the debt levels over time.
And nervous about him and his tendency to go all in, right?
That's what I was
Well, you want to throw your money behind this guy when you know, like, maybe long term he's going to come good, but there's a high chance that he's going to go bust or 90% down at some point. Do you think it's luck?
No, I think there's a bit of luck, but I'm a bit more generous about Masa, because I think he does really have an appreciation of the entrepreneur who's likely to make it. Now, I know he got Adam Newman wrong on WeWork, but Jack Ma, I mean, I described this meeting where he's in Beijing in 1999, the end of the year, and he meets him barely for 20 minutes, the Alibaba co-founder, and he just says he could smell the horse flesh. I mean, this guy was going to be a great success, and he was. And I think he has been very astute at seeing potential, but also, and we haven't really talked about this, but it's very important to understand in terms of his successes, he's a middleman. He's the guy who kind of spots the blockages in the supply chain, or, sees an American company wants to come to Japan, like Cisco or Yahoo. So I'll be your middleman. I'll take a cut, and then I'll also maybe use the brand name and build a business in Japan off the
like
brand
Yahoo
name.
Japan and stuff.
Exactly right.
I think you mentioned that he's not really trusted or like in Japan because he's like a bit of a renegade, which is good in a conservative society, but also like his founders, co-founders and people on the board, they find it hard to work with him because he's very impulsive. Do you think that trickles down to the shareholders? Like he's got a reputation that like he's very hard to predict. So that makes people a little bit nervous.
I think that is right. But there have been times when this has become a problem. And the biggest problem was around 2019, 20. There was a tech bubble. I think you'd probably agree.
Yep.
And then you had COVID, which popped it. Then central banks came in, tech share prices come back up again. And Masa was sort of trading in and out of that. And he really was close to the edge when in March 2020, when the bubble pricked. I mean, SoftBank share price had just collapsed. By the way, I think that's also, the SoftBank share price went down very sharply in 2008 in the global financial crisis. So it's these wild swings rather than him per se.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tie it to him, but I would argue actually there are a whole load, by the way, of Japanese retail investors who like Masa because he's not that sort of boring, dark suit, white shirt. Good job we're not wearing that.
Yeah, I was like,
Not on this podcast. I got my Japanese t-shirt on.
No Japanese colours here. But, they see him as something exciting and offering something different, and they're prepared to take that.
But another factor was that why he's maybe not respected in Japan is that he doesn't make anything.
Yeah.
There's no he's not a manufacturer. He doesn't produce, and they don't understand that. And do you think a lot of his desire to succeed is for acceptance within that community?
That's a great point about not making something, because if you think of the the Japanese great companies like Toyota, Nippon Steel, the Panasonic, the consumer electronics companies, the computer companies. This is manufacturing. This is making stuff that is very tangible, mass market, and precision. Whereas Masa's, it's financial engineering, it's venture capital, it's sort of intangible. And if you add on basic Japanese prejudice against Koreans, I mean, there are still people who said to me, he's Korean. Or even more, I mean, I better not say who it was because it's a family program. I asked one of a very well-known Japanese entrepreneur in the tech area, could I talk to him about Masa? And he was clearly hiding, but because the Japanese have no word for no, he wouldn't say no to an interview. So I finally gave up and I said, well, what would be the one question you would ask him? Because it's clearly you're very busy. So he said, just ask Masa, why does he hate the Japanese so much? I mean, what a question.
Do you think he does hate the
No,
Japanese?
I just think
he lives there and he loves it, right?
Yeah, but because he doesn't fit their mold, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
he doesn't represent the
Exactly.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was also, that to me was latent racism. Yeah. And just to me, again, confirmed the prejudice towards him. And he is one of the two richest men in Japan. The other one is Tadashi Yanai, who's the founder of Uniqlo, the clothing brand, hugely successful. And Yanai was on his board for 18 years. Yeah. But he too, he's not prejudiced against Masa. He has some respect for him. But he regarded him as unserious. Yeah. And also has this great line about, what's the problem? He says, well, you shouldn't mix clean water with dirty water.
Yeah. But you said that's not what it really means.
I mean, that sounds awful.
It's got like hidden connotations.
Who's the clean water?
Yeah. And he was really upset about the way Putin embraced him in the G20 summit in Osaka or on another time. And he'd seen this and he thought Masa plays, dirty pool.
Do you think he will influence a generation of Japanese youngsters, though, and that their entrepreneurship will change?
Well, I think it is changing a little bit. I mean, it already has had some influence because perhaps a personal experience would illustrate this very well, which is, one of my first book events, there were several Japanese in the audience. And one gentleman, he was in his probably early 30s, came over, asked me to sign a copy of Gambling Man, and then said, could he take a photograph of me, a selfie, me and him? And he explained that he was a banker with Mitsubishi Bank. And then he said, because Masa is my hero. He's different. He's exciting. And a lot of the young Japanese do want to work for SoftBank because it's like a breath of fresh air. Yeah. It's less hierarchical. I mean, it is hierarchical to a degree because nobody has any doubt who the big boss is, and it's Masayoshi Son, head of SoftBank. But there's a lot of young, talented people. And I think the second part is that slowly Japanese companies are becoming a little less rigid in their corporate governance. They're having some, would you believe it, women on boards.
Scandalous.
Scandalous.
Shocking.
Scandalous, shocking. And thinking about share buybacks. There's been some quite successful activist investors getting into Japanese companies. So I think things are changing, but it's still Japanese. Look, it's Japan, so it's a bit glacial.
There's nothing in business as important as trust. To be honest, my whole business is about trust. And that's why, if you're running a business, proving trust through your security programs like GDPR is as important as it gets. Vanta helps centralize program requirements and automate evidence collection for frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more. So you save time and money and build customer trust. Plus with Vanta, you get continuous visibility into the state of your controls. Join more than 8,000 global companies like Flow Health, Synthesia, and Alaka Bank, who trust Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. This is the new way to handle risk, governance, and compliance. And you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you visit vanta.com/makingmoney. There's a link in the description for you.
If we zoom out from Japan and we look at the world, you quote an investor who said that Masa is good for the system as long as there's not too many of him.
God, Damo, you really have just... And he hasn't got any underlining. He hasn't even opened the book. This is so impressive.
Thank you.
Do you want a job? He's got a job.
Yeah, got a job. But I want to understand what you mean by that, and I want to understand, how influential are these people on the global market, and should they be that influential?
Well, I don't want to get too philosophical with you on this program, but I was a financial journalist from mid-'80s when I was on the Sunday Times. Then I joined the FT, the Financial Times, and I stayed on that paper and news organization for nearly 35 years. Worked in New York for 4 years as a senior editor, and worked in London. And when I was writing about finance or organizing the coverage, the one thing I learned is that a bit of friction is important in the system. You don't want it either too cozy. You want disruptors. You want people who are going to take risks. Otherwise, you get cartels, price fixing, all this kind of thing. It's all too cozy. If you want to drive innovation, you need to have risk. And you also need to have, the venture capital system, again, is people who are prepared to make outside bets on moonshots and stuff. And Masa does that. On the other hand, and I'm now going to come to what you were saying about this is gigantic risk. This is betting the company. Well, if you had everybody betting the company, that wouldn't be necessarily a great idea. I mean, we all know that the world's financial system almost crashed, or certainly crashed, but almost melted down in 2008. So too much risk is definitely no good, but a certain amount of friction, and that's what Masa's done and does.
So the whole time I was reading the book on this point of 2008, I was thinking, would this man exist if we didn't have near record low rates? Could he take massive amounts of risk because money was free?
Bullseye. Very, very important to understand Masa in terms of a negative or zero interest rate, record low interest rate policy in Japan after the crash, real estate crash and stock market crash in 1989-90. Obviously, if you go back then, I was around. I was actually in Washington at the time. But, those land prices in Japan, we know the Imperial Palace worth more than...
California or something.
Yeah, it's just lunatic. And so it was always going to get crashed. And after that, they decided the best thing to do would be to have low interest rates. And it was like a kind of anesthetic. It's like sweet poison, put everybody to sleep. And he benefited from that. He also benefited because if he could borrow low in Japan and then convert on an favorable exchange rate into dollars when the yen was reasonably strong, then he could make acquisitions in America. He was prepared to take those risks. And he made a number of really quite clever acquisitions in the publishing business, in the trade fair business, before the internet investments. So I think that was one benefit. The second was what we call leverage. Yeah, I was going to say, well, globalization, no, that is definitely a given. I mean, no barriers to capital flows, et cetera. He was a big beneficiary of that. But by being able to borrow and then borrow on top of borrowing, which he did very effectively to buy Vodafone Japan. Now, Vodafone Japan was, part of the Vodafone empire, a great telecoms company, was huge in 2000. Vodafone Japan, not such a great band. The only thing that had going for it it was David Beckham.
Okay.
It was its brand ambassador motto. So apart from that, they didn't have much of a consumer one. So anyway, he bought it, but it was twice as big as SoftBank, his company. So he did that by using leverage, cheap borrowing, and then paying it back through securitization, which is, using the assets as collateral to pay back the loans.
A question I
Cash flow.
wanted to ask you off the back of that then was, I'm going to ask you to get a bit more philosophical and in the clouds, but do you think that if we wouldn't have had Masa without low interest rates, would we have had the tech industry we have today if we didn't have the financial collapse of 2008? What I mean by that is, would we have had an appetite to support businesses with no revenues to the point where they changed the world?
Well, I think that was always going to come. And remember that those businesses who were a lot of which were loss-making in the late 1990s, and that would include, by the way, Amazon, or an untested advertising model in Yahoo, or subscription model. Those businesses, they were real businesses. The dog walking app, not so much.
No.
But so that model was already emerging in the late 1990s. So in that sense, the collapse, the dot-com collapse, Masa was right. It was a sort of interruption of a broader trend. Now, after 2008, obviously this period of record low interest rates, I think has helped tech businesses. But in a way, isn't it more important the way in which there's been a concentration of power in big tech companies that have, swallowed up the competition? The Meta, the Facebook buying Instagram, for example, or Facebook buying WhatsApp. Arguably, wouldn't that have been better to have had those competition?
Yeah, I was bemoaning Uber this morning on the way here. And this idea of enshittification, of like, you own the market by giving away.
We really are getting technical here on enshittification.
Sorry, yeah.
Damo, what is enshittification?
So if you Uber is the perfect example, you come in and you offer a service that is so much better than the original business model. You can track the taxis and they're cheaper, and you also get £10 if you invite a friend. So they take the market on, but what they don't tell anyone is you can't make any money making it that much better. Once they've become entrenched, they then enshittify, they make it crap. I mean, go on Google at the minute and search. It is notably worse than it was a few years ago because there's just ads everywhere. And Uber's the same, right? It's surge pricing and it's hard to get a taxi. It used to be really good. So it's this idea that these monopolies, they can come in, they become part of like the fabric, and then they make the service worse. So actually, this morning I was like, just give me a black cab. Where are they? But they've been destroyed out the market. Okay, sorry, we got sidetracked.
We digress. So going forward, I don't know if you have this question already, but going forward, do you think we're in the right time of, or I guess the right economy or right special set of circumstances where we can have another Masa? Like, could there be another Masa?
Masa could be the next Masa.
Could I be the next Masa?
Well, first of all, you'd need to seriously cut the heeled shoes and
I get a bit more Korean, but
yeah.
Do you think the little man thing is a thing, like the Napoleon kind of?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, because he loves Napoleon, doesn't he?
Yes,
he talks about him a lot.
He's got a Napoleon complex. Corsican outsider, Napoleon was, but empire builder. There are parallels here. But the answer to your question is no. I think Masa is really unique in terms of the mixture between operator and investor and gambler. The fact that he's Japanese Korean also makes him unique. Do we have people who are prepared and capable of massive disruption? Yes. Look at Elon Musk in the space industry. Look what he's done to the car industry with electric vehicles. But Elon Musk he's an innovator. Masa is not an innovator. Yeah. He doesn't own proprietary technology or anything like that. So I see him as pretty unique, I must say.
He's the great spotter of trends, but there was something that stuck out, which was he sold NVIDIA too early. Which obviously he sold in 2019, he made a lot of money, but that would have been the next Alibaba, really, wouldn't it? He would have made hundreds of billions potentially. And now he seems to be scrambling to get back into the space a bit. What?
Oh, no question that he is about, or in the middle of his fifth, maybe sixth great comeback, having been written off by investors, having been looked at askance by his big tech friends, because he got it all wrong in the tech bubble. I mean, yeah, people kind of going, well, he was good on Alibaba, but what after that? Vision Fund was very mediocre performance. And then the second Vision Fund was, frankly, a sea of red ink. So he's now doubling and tripling down on artificial intelligence. Now, he's talked about that for 20 years. He said AI is going to be the next great thing. And the mystery is why he didn't get into AI earlier, serious, deep AI. And obviously, NVIDIA is a classic example of that. This designer of super fast, super advanced graphics chips. That company is now worth $3 trillion. Was briefly most valuable company in the world. I think he kind of hedged. He had about just under 5%, and I think he needed some money, so that's why he sold. The mystery is why he didn't hold on to something.
Yeah, like a 1%.
Yeah, just 1%. And then, of course, he was looking at merging NVIDIA with ARM Holdings, the British advanced semiconductor company. And I think that was where his attention was. And what he didn't realize was that the world's antitrust regulators, not just in the US, where we know Lina Khan at the Federal Trade Commission has been a real hardliner, but also in the UK, but also China. They were saying, we don't think we want these big tech combinations. And he failed to read the politics. So for all those reasons, he kind of took his eye off the ball when it came to NVIDIA. Now, of course, he's desperate, and he's just made a $500 million investment in OpenAI, which, invented ChatGPT. And he's been desperately trying to woo Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI.
He seems to, though, he gets enamored with people, and sometimes to his detriment, because the AI you mentioned, he said AI 500 times in a speech, but then had very surface level
over 5 years. Yeah.
Over 5 years, sorry.
But it's the same speech. By the way, it's the same speech.
Oh, is
so
it?
You're not wrong.
Okay, yeah, sorry. But then he has these like surface level AI investments where people are like slapping AI on as a gimmick and miss, like you say, the deep AI component. So this seems to be quite a weakness in his approach.
Yeah, and if I'm honest, Emo, I think that I'm not really sure what really went wrong. I've asked some of his closest colleagues what went wrong, and one of the reasons was when he had this vision fund, and he has $98.6 billion, he has to get the money out the door rather quickly. And he wasn't really paying attention. And then he had people working for his vision fund who were being marked on how much money they were literally spending on the companies. That was the measure. Just, well, have you invested? Have you spent your money? I mean, this is lunatic. You're not going to have then discriminate investing. So also he was seeing people for, very short, 15, 20 minutes and signing $500 million checks.
Wild.
This is crazy.
Gusto turned him down because they wanted like 100, and he was like, you gave him 500. They were like, we can't spend that. And they're like quite, they're careful thinkers, the Gusto guys, and they're very like precise, and they walked away from the money.
Yeah, and I mean, I was at, as one does, I was at a wedding in Italy the other weekend, and there were a number of Indian venture capital and private equity people. And they all were interested in my book on Masa because they'd had companies that had gone belly up. And then they'd been sort of vulture, coming in on the back of it. And they also told me a story about how, this force feeding of founders, tech founders, was lunatic. So they knew people, Indian, who'd gone to Masa and literally been given 3 or 4 times the money they actually originally asked for. I mean, this is Nutsville, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's wild. I work in venture capital. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, we should hear more from you. This is nuts.
Yeah, this is my show now. No, it is nuts because normally people go for like the minimum. They never offer more than what you're asking for. Like that's unheard of. Like if you're looking for 1 million, no one's going to give you 2
They're probably asking for a bit more than they need anyway.
Yeah, that's what
right?
everyone asks for, more than they need. No one gets given more than they ask for. So it's like actually unheard of.
Yeah,
Is this because of the 7% coupon or he promised to the Middle East that he basically needed a return?
good question. I think that might have played a little part in his mind, but it's more that memorable scene that I describe in the book where he's with Adam Newman of WeWork, who's wants billions more from SoftBank. And he goes to Tokyo, and Masa is with the CEO and founder of Didi Chuxing, which is the ride-hailing rival to Uber. And Didi has just beaten out your favorite company, Uber. And he calls in Adam Newman to meet the Chinese guy and says, now, Adam, look, this is the guy who's just beaten Uber. He's the big shot. And by the way, I want to ask you, in a fight, who wins? The crazy man, the crazy guy or not? And Newman thinks for about 2 seconds and says, crazy guy. And that's what Masa is like dream to be crazy. I'll give you more money. And then the third thing is I actually think he thinks that you can overwhelm the competition just by, stuffing the company with money. And by the way, how would you like it if I say to you, take this money? And by the way, if you don't take it, I'm giving it to Dema.
So your competitor, yeah.
How would you like that?
You're going to take it.
A good point.
Most people would,
and it's
a
not
lot of people
alone.
would take it, yeah.
It's not a loan. It's, you don't have to pay it back, right? If the business goes bust, the business goes bust and you walk away.
Yeah, but it's still, you don't want your business
Yeah, there's
to
a
go
pressure,
bust.
but
But it's more...
If I come to you now and go, I'll give you 300 million quid, you'd probably take it and go, I'll figure it out.
Yeah,
it's going to be hard to turn that down, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Especially if the alternative is, I'll give it to your competitor. And then
Yeah.
you're definitely
And
done.
he
you're
was
screwed
doing
then.
Then you're
that.
definitely done,
And he
yeah.
would do that all the time. He did it on Uber. He said, well, I'll put it into Lyft. I'll put the money. And similarly with Yahoo, if you don't take the money at Yahoo, I'll put it into Excite.
It's a crazy type of hostile takeover, isn't it? Where it's
Well,
bullish.
I think it's more than a hostile takeover. It reminds me of Al Capone
Yeah.
going over and saying, nice place you got here. Pity if something happened.
yeah, it's like racketeering almost. Yeah.
there is
You
a
need
bit of
protection.
that.
Yeah,
you need
Otherwise,
protection.
yeah.
You don't want something to happen to this venue.
What next? Because you paint, this side of him seems. This is the side that scares me. In terms of if I was giving him my money, do you think coming away from it that he's got another chapter?
I do, and I think it will be through AI. I think he's still got his relationships intact. He has an important relationship with Apple. We haven't mentioned it, but I'll say that, of course,
The phones.
Exactly.
I
the
read the
iPhone.
book, I paid attention. Yeah. When he took over the phone company and then he bought lots of their phones.
He got Steve Jobs, the legendary Apple founder, to give him the exclusive distribution contract for the Wonder product, the iPhone. And that was in 2007-8. I mean, amazing. So that saved his, mobile phone business in Japan, or at least it made it number 2 to NTT, which is the overwhelming, player in telecoms and mobile. I think he really does have another comeback act, and I think it is around AI.
Because he's a big proponent of the singularity. Do you want to hit the button?
Yeah.
Which is
You're too quick. I was like, ooh, singularity.
It's broadly the idea when computers become smarter than humans. But a lot of people speak about it almost as it's like switching on God, isn't it? It's like the moment that every problem gets solved, including dying. And Masa is on that end of the scale, isn't he? He thinks, I will live
120, 130, he told of somebody I absolutely believe, and known the guy for 20 years. He's a top Indian businessman, and Masa, with a straight face, said, 120 or 130. And this singularity, this notion of when the robots become smarter than
when
the humans.
Skynet goes online.
Yeah.
And Skynet goes online. And, he thinks there's going to be amazing scientific innovation, life will change, society will change. And he says, and that in the last interview I did in this you've got to remember it's in Tokyo, it's in his private office. He's sitting at the head of a table which is even longer and bigger than the one that Vladimir Putin has in the Kremlin. He says, that's what I want to be remembered as, my legacy. Because I asked him that, and he said, I want to be at the center of the artificial general intelligence revolution, which is that moment you're talking about.
I love it, because I love that a man that is so willing to spend his money is backing that, because, I want to live forever too. I'm happy that he's pouring billions into it. Go for it.
We'll be here some
you got a while to go.
Some Tesla robots with our brains in it just sitting here.
Well, Jeff's trying to get to space, and says Elon, I've not got time for that. I don't want to go to Mars. It's a horrible place, but him pouring his money into that, go for it. He sounds like an optimist, a tech optimist, but the quote, it made me sad, this. What a shitty life. I've done nothing that I can be proud of. This is just a mediocre, shitty life. That does not sound like someone who's very optimistic about themselves or believes in themselves.
So I read that quote and I used it, and I've often used it because I wrestled with what he was trying to say. Because you could read it as he's trying to get, it's sort of self-pity and get me to feel sorry for him. Somehow I don't think that feels quite right. He's got a whole thing about his physical appearance. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like being photographed. He doesn't like being portrayed with his face. So I think he does feel, unlike all three of us, that, he's not a handsome person. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself.
No, you hit the nail right on the head there. A bunch of dapper-looking lads over here we are, aren't we?
But so I think there's a bit of that, and then there's this bit which, if you push me, I'd say this is what it's really about. Is he uses that kind of self-criticism, very harsh self-criticism, say I haven't achieved anything, as a spur to try and do greater things. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of saying, I'm not satisfied. So you think, some people may think I'm finished, but actually
I haven't done anything.
So I think it's that.
Yeah.
Actually.
So when he does the next AI chapter, that might be his the leg. Because if he's talking about legacy, but he's scared to have he doesn't like his picture taken, they're kind of, again, opposing things, which seems to be a theme with him. But for the long term, do you think he wants to do something big with AI and be like, okay, now I've done something?
To be remembered.
I do.
To be remembered. Yeah.
I absolutely do. But I also think that he's going to have to be carried out in a coffin. Mm-hmm. I mean, he is Mr. SoftBank. The idea is he talked about, retiring age 60 and my life will have been served. No. I mean, he's never going to be satisfied. And I sort of liken him a bit to that Greek classical tragic hero or tragic figure Sisyphus, the one who's rolling the boulder uphill.
Up the hill, and then it rolls back down, and then he's got to push it
again.
back up. Yeah, that's a sucky job.
It's a definitely. That's one way of putting
it. I've done nothing that I can be proud of. Up and down all day.
It's like Sisyphus.
Yeah.
Because there's something about the human condition.
This is it, because, reading it, it's very easy to focus on the failings and go, how did he pick himself up? To me, it's more of a marvel to have 100 billion and be like, let's go. Yeah. Because it's like, you won. You have won the game.
He's still got 35 billion now. I'd be sitting comfortably.
He's lost $250 billion. Yeah. He's lost Elon Musk's whole net worth. And
he's still doing very, very, very well.
Yeah, if he just stopped and just compounded it, in relatively safe investments for a long period of time, he'd probably be right up there, wouldn't he?
Yes. I mean, if anybody's listening out there and says, I think, Lionel Barber's got his sums wrong, it's not $250 billion, it's 400 billion, that wouldn't be right. But if he says it's too high, I mean, I was just doing that in my head. I only did maths.
Maybe it's 150 billion.
No, it's more than that, because if you think anyway, it's a lot of money.
He's lost enough money to put him in the top 5 on the rich list. And it's. I mean, but a lot of these guys share that trait, right? They keep going, and I think if you're the kind of person who would tap out when you get there, you're never going to get there.
That's right.
You're militant.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was a fascinating individual. You completely changed my mind on him. I thought he was just like some degenerate gambler who was rich from birth, and probably, because his dad did make money and he did have a leg up, but there was also this kind of extreme poverty before it. So he's been through it all. I hope people kind of pay attention to him and the book, because I do think we assume language barriers put up a big barrier, don't they? And I think,
well, that means a lot to me that if you read the book and you felt differently at the end of it, that means that I've kind of done what I was trying to do, which is get people to revisit. And also, I don't want to get too high and mighty and in the clouds about, cultural differences, but we kind of look at people we don't understand because we don't have the language, or we have an image of, somebody says, I'm like Yoda, or talks about feel the force. Okay, so he's small, so he's like Yoda, so he's this. And that's the instant rush to judgment. It's not a nuanced view. I mean, I think that I was trying to put something a bit like, it's a bit more complicated. I mean, yes, he's reckless, but he's also incredibly visionary. And you can have the two things in, heart and one's soul, it's
and like I said,
combo.
And I think the lesson is for everyone to take a bit more risk, to be a little bit more Masa. You don't need to risk the whole empire, but you should take those risks because this guy keeps coming back and surviving. And I think especially in the UK, we're not very entrepreneurial. We don't stand up and.
Well, I'm sure you would agree that it's taking risk, and also it's saying, okay, failure isn't a terrible thing.
Yes.
That's what I got from the book. It made me feel better about my small failings because they're not quite as big as his, but then again, my wins aren't as big either. But you learn from your failings.
Jeff Bezos always says this, there's good failure and bad failure. I mean, if you're doing the same thing, exactly the same thing over and over again, that's different. But good failure, where you're trying to do something different, you're an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur, somebody put this really well for me, and it's so obvious, but it's true, is the very nature of entrepreneurialism is risk-taking. It involves risk. And if you're taking risk, that must, per se, involve failure.
Yeah. Right? With Jeff, he says around, one-way and two-way doors, the decisions that a one-way door, you step through it, you can never step back. Prime was that. If I promise next day delivery, I can never take that away because it ruins the business. We think long and hard about that decision. But a two-way door, make the decision. If it's bad, come back. And I think the risk that most people have are two-way doors. You start a little side company or hustle, it goes badly, oh well, I've still got my job. I quit work, I can always go get another job. And I think, that was, the people you've interviewed, the greatest minds, like they're amazing. And I've added Masa now to my list of people that I want to look at as someone that, to learn from, because I am guilty of probably only following people that kind of look like me. White Western males, because that's why.
Are you pointing at me?
I wasn't pointing at you.
No, white Western.
We're brothers, mate. Look just alike. Yeah. No, do you think that all the people that you've interviewed, from Putin, Obama, do they all share a similar trait, do you think? Or are they all very different?
They are different, but political leaders, are, by their nature, they have a pretty powerful ego. I mean, you're not a shrinking violet if you become president of the United States. Look at all the figures in history. Now, Putin is a different figure because he wasn't really elected to anything. He comes from the dark side. He's a secret agent. He's a KGB. And, when I interviewed him, that was a completely different experience. I mean, it was quite chilling. But what I realized with him is that he wanted a certain degree of respect. And when I prepared for the interview, I did my prep. I talked to some people, and they all said, if you start trying to get at him and the interview straight up, you won't get anywhere. So give him the credit, mention the fact that, and this was in 2019, he'd been in power for 20 years. Of course, he's an autocrat. He's a killer. And what came later has come later with the invasion of Ukraine. But if you're going to be in there for an hour and a half, and that's what the goal was, even hopefully longer, then don't start the interview by trying to make a point. Or also, don't do what Tucker Carlson, the TV anchor in the States, did. He goes over to the Kremlin and sort of asks a rather daft question. And Putin had him, made him a gibbering wreck in a matter of minutes by just saying, I thought this was going to be a serious interview. Well, with Putin, I made sure it was serious from the beginning.
Do you think ego is the thing that they all share then?
Oh, as leaders, yeah.
Even Masa as a
Yeah,
there's an ego element.
I think you talked earlier or asked earlier about self-doubt. Now, I think good leaders do have just a level of humility. I mean, not self-doubt, but humility. They are capable of checking with others. But I think what unites political leaders is, ego. Mm-hmm. Not much self-doubt.
We're speaking about ego. So we would love to get some feedback from yourself in terms of interviewing people, considering, who you've interviewed and where we're at. We're very early in the game, aren't we? What we've been doing this now, 18 months?
Yeah.
So I have a YouTube channel, which was the start of me being a creator. And then the podcast was Will, the producer, approached me and said, do you want to start a podcast? And then we've been doing this 18 months. And I quickly learned it's a very different skill set to speaking alone to a camera. Yeah, so we would love some feedback if you have any.
Well, I'm not buttering your parsnips or even.
I don't eat parsnips.
He's saying that again.
Buttering your parsnips. I love that. I love that.
Or as they say in North Carolina or South Carolina, I ain't buttering your biscuits.
Yeah.
But I think you guys you're well on the way to doing a very good interview because you've done prep. Both of you are very good at looking at the person when you're interviewing them, which is also helpful. Whereas if you're kind of like that, that's a no-no. And I suppose, again, I'm just saying this because I don't, it took years for me to get this right. I think for my first 25 plus years, when I'd be interviewing somebody important, I feel it was very, I needed to be a bit overly deferential. Mm-hmm. Whereas there's a way of being politely deferential. Because, when I interviewed Trump, I mean, the idea that, you're going to be overly deferential with Trump and you're in the Oval Office, I mean, he's just going to wipe the floor with you. So I deliberately, tried to say something that would get his attention to realize, I'm not a pushover here. I'm serious. I'm not rude. But, I said, Mr. President, thank you for seeing us today. And thank you for subscribing to the Financial Times. He said, that's okay. You lost. I won.
You do some very good
you did a great impression.
Yeah.
So did you check the database and was he subscribed or?
No, I knew because the Times, Michael Gove, who was then on the Times. Yes, he was on the. No, he was a minister. Why was he in that interview? No, Rupert Murdoch interviewed Trump in Trump Tower, and I think he brought Michael Gove, but I could be wrong on that. I need to double check. But certainly, and in Trump's office, there was a pile of Financial Times on the desk. And if you look at the Times photograph, so I knew he was a subscriber.
Have you sat down beforehand and thought, what can I say, to assert that little bit of power in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Putin in German. So although I was polite, because I speak fluent German, I'm a German student and I still speak it and read it. And I knew he was a KGB agent in East Germany. So I thought, I will say, thank you very much for seeing us, but I'll say it in German. And I mentioned this to my colleague, said, oh, no. And I said, no, I'll do it. And he spoke back to me in German. He couldn't resist.
Of course.
And so it went back and forth. And I almost got it wrong because he said, where did you learn your German? And I said, actually, at Oxford University, but also in Germany. And he said, what did you study in Oxford University? And I said, German and modern history. And it's all going well, and all this is in German. And then he says, in German to me, and what is modern history? And it was like being hit.
I had to shut myself.
Exactly. It was like being hit by a kind of sledgehammer punch right on the chin, and your brain freezes. And I'm thinking, I've got to answer. And it came to me after about 2 seconds, and I said in German, modern history is everything after 1989. And he loved that. And then he said, okay, now to business.
So what was the thing with Masa? What was the key that unlocked him?
Do you know, the first time I went to Tokyo, it's October 2022. I'm all geared up. I've read a lot of articles. I've probably done about 15 months of research. Get to Tokyo and they say, he's too busy. I go, what? I'll come all the way to Tokyo. And the SoftBank flunky goes, sorry, I better not call him flunky. Nice man with smile says, but there's nice weather in Tokyo. And I said, look, I'm serious. I'm going to do this book, whether you like it or not. I'm serious. I'm disappointed that Masa's too busy. I know he's, it's been COVID and all the rest of it, but I'm coming back. And next time I want to see him. But meanwhile, I'm off to go to his hometown in the island of Kyushu, and I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to walk around, see the schools. I'm going to go to the port where his grandparents came, everything. And I'll come back. And do you know what? The key thing was when I finally did the first interview in February 2023, I'd done all that homework. I could say, no, Masa, but when you were 5, you did this. Or your mother said that. And he was mind blown. He went, oh, Cajun, understand. Sorry, very politically incorrect. Didn't mean to do Masa accent. But, he was saying, that's amazing, you know this. But I was kind of in a strange way, having been, blown off the first time. I turned it into an advantage, and I was able to show that I really understood his roots, his position as an outsider, and where he came from. And that's the key to this biography and the key to the man.
So Masa is clearly at the extreme end of the investing spectrum, throwing billions on gut instinct. But before he got there, he needed to start somewhere. So what we've done is we've put together an email that shows you one way that you can start investing today. Tamain, where do people access that email?
In their inbox.
In the description below.
Well, where do you access emails from?
Oh God, this guy.
Will just said we're gonna send one email as a cheat sheet. So how is it gonna be in the description?
Wear it. Own it. Yes. Just leave it. Don't worry about it. He was right. I asked him. Where do you get the email? You get it in your inbox. Thank you. Good night.